Have you ever sat down to play a solo and you've thought, why does the scale sound weird right now? You're going... Sometimes those notes that are part of the scale and part of the key, they feel weird. What's going on there? Well, today what we're going to talk about is how to access the secret chords. How to access the chords that are going by in a chord progression you're playing, and how to kind of superimpose them over the pentatonic scale. Let me play that progression back again, and I want to show you there's some little chord shapes that are hiding in the pentatonic scale. So here we are in the key of F major. I'm going to play this pentatonic scale here. Now, I've got the shape going on right here, but in orange I'm going to put, here's the actual notes in the F chord, and here's the actual notes in the C chord. Today what I want to show you how to do, first of all, is just how to even get the hang of thinking about those shapes there, which is not as scary as it might seem. The other thing I want to show you how to do is how to even practice thinking about getting that into your soloing, because it is kind of a heavy thing to think about. But before we go there, I gotta give you just kind of a quick conceptual thing here. So, this pentatonic scale, the one that we all know and love, if you put your pinky on C and you line up the scale, then we're in the key of C major. Where the heck is my capo? Well, if I capo where my first finger was playing all those notes, and I play a G chord, this is actually, it's a G shape. It's no longer a G chord because it's not down here. It's actually called the G-shaped pentatonic scale, because in open position here, it's in the key of G. If you're feeling theory overwhelmed here and you're feeling tricked, like, hey, I thought we were going to talk about soloing. We're going to get there very soon, but this concept is going to help you a lot. I moved that chord up sort of the same way you would move a bar chord up. So with bar chords, you know, this is your root note, and then this is your shape that kind of attaches to that root note. Well, everything on guitar is movable in the same way a bar chord is. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Why is this important? This pentatonic scale in open position is in the key of G. But if it's in the key of G, it means we can also take other chords that are part of the key of G and just move them along. So, before your eyes glaze over, well, let them glaze more. I promise it's worth it. Check it out. Here's a little set of chords. You've got the chords in the key of G major and the chords in the key of E minor. Notice those Roman numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Also, just take a second to think about, those are all the same chords. The key of E minor and the key of G, pretty much all the same chords. That little F sharp circly thing there is called an F sharp half diminished, and we're not really gonna talk about that shape today at all, so don't worry too much if you've never seen or heard of that before. Maybe we'll get into it another time. In the key of G, a 1-4 chord progression is a G chord and a C chord. So if I just capo that, even just 1 fret, maybe 2 frets, I'm playing the same thing, but these are not the same chords anymore. I've actually moved up this G shape. The root note is on A now, so this is actually an A chord, and this chord here that was a C chord is now a D chord. Everything just moved up 1 note. Why am I showing you this? Well, if we go up to the key of C major on the 8th fret here, pinky on 8, and I'm playing a 1-4 chord progression, I know that, and hopefully you will know at the end of this lesson now, that in the key of G, a 1-4 chord progression is a G and a C chord. But since the pentatonic is just stealing the shape of the key of G, I can superimpose this G shape here and this C shape here, which also includes these notes back here. So I got... Now, when I go to play a solo, you can practice kind of picturing those chord shapes being there, and you can think about ending your phrases on notes that are part of the chord. Here's what I'm talking about. With this progression, let's just set up the scale. So we're on 8th fret. Now, let me show you the chords for a second here. Here's your 1 chord, here's your 4 chord. So if I play a phrase, isn't that kind of cool? So, if you're gonna play a 1-4 chord progression in the key of D, those shapes are still gonna be 1 and 4 in that key. Let's go down to the key of A. Here's a 1, 4, same shapes. So this is one of those things that's always true. If we go to this little list here again, these chords are just the shapes that represent 1, 4, 1, 5, 1 to 2. So let's talk for a second. I would really want to drive this concept home. Let's talk about a 1, 2 chord progression, which in the key of G is 1, 2. G major, A minor. So let's say we want to put that chord progression in the key of A. Well, just for the sake of kind of clarity here, if I capo here, I've essentially raised what was a G chord here up 2 frets, so now this is an A, and this was an A minor, now it's a B minor, but it's still an A minor shape. See how the shapes are the same. So if I put that jam track, I'm just going to strum for a second so you can see. We got so those are the chords. Now if I take this capo off, I can still. Now, because I'm playing lead, I don't need to strum the chords, but I do need to know where they are, where the notes in the chord are, so that when I play a riff, sorry, I got carried away. Let me just run you through a couple quick chord progressions here. So if we go back to this 1-5 chord progression in the key of F, which we'll play up at the 13th fret, pinky on 13. There's the 1 chord shape. Here's the 5 chord shape, which is a D shape. It's always going to be a D shape. There we go. So I could play a little riff on 1, something like. Now I've landed on a note that works with the chord. If this is feeling kind of wild and difficult, I'll give you some ways to practice in a minute that are very relaxing and comfortable and not too stressful. Let's talk about some minor progressions. So we've got the key of G here, and then up earlier I had the key of E minor. What's that all about? Well, not to get too theory on you, but G major and E minor are what's called relative major and minor keys. So E minor is the relative minor of G, and G is the relative major of E minor. And all that means is what you see right in front of you now. They share all the same notes, they share all the same chords. It's just that in the minor key, E minor is the 1 chord, meaning it's the most important chord. And in the major key, G is the 1 chord, which means it's the home chord that the song tends to push toward. So what that means is if we're going to go into a minor key here, our first finger now is going to set up the key for us. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So you already know C is on the 8th fret, but this is going to sound bad because that's C major. We need C minor. So we'll put the first finger here. Now, here's that shape. Here's the 1 chord. here's the 4 chord. The 4 chord is an A minor shape. 1, 4, 1, 4. So sorry, I can't help it sometimes. It's so hard to try to pack all this into 15 minutes. Please let me know if you want a more in-depth music theory lesson, because we just don't have time in this video. Otherwise, I'll be editing for like 2 years. In the minor key, though, if E minor is 1, A minor is 4, B minor is 5. Now this B minor chord is already an A minor shape, so we got to figure out a way to make it fit kind of in this pentatonic zone a little bit. This next progression is a G minor, and it's a 1-5 progression. So here's the pentatonic scale, and then here is the E minor chord. These notes here are actually also part of the E minor chord. You wouldn't want to strum them necessarily, especially this guy, but you could definitely include it in your solo here. Now the 5 chord, if we go up here, we've actually ditched a lot of notes from the pentatonic scale, so if we want to kind of play a different voicing of it, this is not really a chord I would ever enjoy playing. But to visualize, you can think of it as a B7, but without this note. It's almost like a little comb shape. So this... it's a weird shape. It's the weirdest one. We'll talk more in depth about it at some point, but I just wanted to give you as many tools as you can. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here's this progression. So this one's in G minor. Here we go. So we've set up the progression here. Now there's the 1 chord. Here's the 5 chord, which you could either visualize up here, or you could visualize down here, back to G minor. These guys are also part of that chord. And then we're going to go back to B minor. You could think of it down here or up here. So let me show you how I would play a phrase over that. Interesting. These concepts are really big and kind of hard to swallow sometimes, but what you got to keep in mind here is it's really only 5 or 6 shapes, and those chords are transposable everywhere along with the pentatonic scale, and it's one of the coolest things. So if we're going to talk about how to practice here, I recommend using the A major 1-2 chord progression, because it goes by kind of slow. You get a minute to kind of think about each chord, and the shapes are kind of easy to see. Practice method number 1, just get used to those shapes being there and prove to yourself that they sound the way that you might expect them to sound. So if you line up your key here in the key of A major, then you're going to take your... basically you're just going to arpeggiate to the chord progression and make sure that those notes that I'm telling you are part of the chord, make sure that it sounds the way you might expect it to sound, considering it's part of the chord that's happening. And maybe you can even try the opposite and make sure that it doesn't sound as good for them to be flipped around. So line up your scale, A major. And now arpeggiate. You're just proving to yourself that these sound right. There's an A minor shape. Then we'll go back to the G shape. You can kind of play around with the rhythm as long as you're on the right chord. So now, the thing you can do that's backwards is you can deliberately play the shape that doesn't go with that chord, just to kind of prove to yourself that it's not going to sound as good. Here's what I'm talking about. I'll play the 2 chord shape over the 1 chord. Sounds kind of wonky. Now I'll play the 1 chord over the 2 chord. See what I mean? So if you're Now I'm back on track. Sounds really nice. You can kind of train your ear to go, I know I'm on the 2 chord because I'm playing notes for the 2 chord and it feels right. That's your practice method number 1, is just arpeggiate. Get used to those shapes being there and prove to yourself that it sounds nice to play along with the actual chord. And it's also really important to remember that it fits inside the pentatonic scale. Maybe give or take an extra note somewhere around there. So, practice method number 2 is going to be end phrases on a note that's part of the chord, whatever chord's happening now. And an easy way to do this is just make a phrase that you know is going to end on a note in the 1 chord, like this. So I know that I've got this note here is definitely part of this G shape here. So now when the 2 chord comes around, I'm going to go, I change that last note, or add a note to include a note that's actually on the next chord. Let's hear how that sounds for a second. So, so we got, sounds good. Now I'm going to fix it for the 2 chord. There we go. I'll try another phrase here. Simple phrases. Ah, fixed. Try another one. Kind of a long phrase, but just sounds so deliberate, doesn't it? Keep it simple, because the idea here is you're trying to integrate this concept into your playing, and you're not trying to, you don't need to rush it. It's going to sound nice. Keep it simple, and what you're trying to do is just get your brain used to the idea of going, oh, there's a little bit more specific information just inside the pentatonic scale. So, if that's feeling easy, then what you can do is, I will call this practice method number 2, is you can start and end phrases on notes that are part of the chord. And this is where it starts to get a little tricky, but totally doable here. Check it out. We'll use that same track. So, I'm going to start here, because that's part of the 1 chord. So now I got to adjust my starting point. I could go here. And now I've essentially done a relocate, a diatonic transposition, which is really cool. And I can do the same thing. There we go. I'm just trying to start and end on a note that's part of the chord. It's a little tricky. And here's something to keep in mind. A little important side note is music is weird. Music is awesome. But the thing that's awesome about it is there aren't any rules. There's just this concept of if it sounds good, it is good. So why even bother learning this stuff? Well, it's because part of what sounds good is sounding deliberate. And if you can work towards making sounds that you are intending to make, that can usually take you really far in your kind of creative journey of being like, I want to create this kind of sound, and I actually have some tools to be able to do it, instead of just saying, I hope I sound like that at some point. But I am a big believer in whatever sounds good to you is great, and if this stuff is overwhelming, don't worry about it. But if it sounds like a fun challenge, by all means, let's do it. Let's keep going. Practice method number, whatever number we're on right now. This one is just kind of playful. You can think of it as sort of like a walk or jump kind of concept. And what you're doing is you're just sort of really loosely walking through the scale. And when you know you're on a note that's part of the chord, you can jump to another note that's part of the chord. So if you're just walking through the scale and you go, okay, I know I'm on the 1 chord. I'm just jumping around. And the trick with this game is you can only jump, meaning not play the next note. Jump in this case means like going 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 notes away. So this would be a jump. And that's a walk. I'm just walking through the scale. Now I jumped. So this game here, you're kind of trying to challenge yourself to see, like, how well do I know this shape, and how much control do I have over my hands that I can go jump from one note in the chord to another note in the chord. And then when you change chords, and that you can be kind of sloppy with this because it's going to sound good, and this is also going to help you interact with the chords in a less kind of formal way like we did with the other two. And I really think that sloppiness is what makes music awesome, but if you can combine sloppiness with understanding these concepts, it's going to go really far. So I'm going to leave you here on this kind of practice method, and if you've enjoyed this today, and if you have questions, and if you want to know more, let me know, because I'm just starting this YouTube adventure of mine, and I'm having a lot of fun so far. So please subscribe if you want more, and let me know what you want more of. Anyways, this sloppy practice method of walk or jump, here we go. Okay.